My name is Myra Lombera, and I'm Chief Operations Officer at the Michelson 20 Million Minds Foundation. This morning, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you all. So thank you so much for joining us for what we're sure will be a rich and timely discussion. Before we get started, and as we give individuals a few minutes to hop on Zoom, I'd like to share a bit of background on our foundation and briefly preview what we have in store for you today. Founded by Dr. Gary K. Michelson and Alia Michelson in 2010, the Michelson 20mm Foundation believes that equitable educational and economic opportunities are essential to activating humanity's full potential. For over a decade, it had served 20 million minds, the approximate number of post-secondary students in the US, by advancing open educational resources, smart justice, digital equity, and intellectual property education. Recognizing the need for change at scale, Michelson 20mm also invests in tech entrepreneurs, change makers, and policy to catalyze scalable innovations in the knowledge economy and accelerate progress toward a more just world. And today, we proudly uplift one more vertical of work in our efforts to address our nation's student basic needs crisis. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Miguel Leon, Student Basic Needs Program Officer at Michelson 20mm. Miguel has been a passionate agent of change, working with socially and economically marginalized communities at home and abroad for more than 17 years. His uncanny ability to build cross-sector collaborative efforts has been an asset to our organization, and he is by and large the individual behind today's event. So I ask you to please join me in warmly welcoming Miguel, who will be leading us through today's program.
Muchas gracias, Mayra. Appreciate the kind words. Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. Our program today, addressing the student basic needs crisis, seeing students as humans first, will discuss the current landscape of this ever-increasing crisis in our higher education system, and will uplift the hope and respite that the new year might bring to students. Today, you will hear from the nation's leaders on student basic needs as they discuss the critical next steps we must take to ensure students can thrive. As a special treat, after our panel discussion, you will briefly meet the partners that the Michelson 20mm Foundation will be working with in 2021 to effect the change that students so desperately need. On our panel today, we have Dr. Rashida Crutchfield. Dr. Crutchfield is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at California State University, Long Beach. She is an advocate committed to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities through research and service. Dr. Crutchfield was a principal investigator for the California State University Office of the Chancellor's Study on Food and Housing Security. Her continued research and advocacy on basic needs for students has garnered statewide and national attention. She has authored or co-authored many publications, including Addressing Homelessness and Housing Insecurity in Higher Education, Strategies for Educational Leaders. Also on our panel, we have Dr. Sarah Goldrick Rabb. Dr. Goldrick Rabb is Professor of Sociology and Medicine at Temple University and founder and president of the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice in Philadelphia. She is also the Chief Strategy Officer for Emergency Aid at Equity, a student financial success and emergency aid company, and also founded Believe in Students, a nonprofit distributing emergency aid. Dr. Goldrick Rabb is best known for her innovative research on food and housing insecurity in higher education, having led the 5 largest national studies on the subject, and for her work on making public higher education free. Last but not least, we have Rachel Sumek. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Swipe Out Hunger, a leading nonprofit that addresses hunger amongst college students. Rachel is a nationally recognized social entrepreneur whose work has been recognized by President Barack Obama and landed her on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. Rachel created Swipe Out Hunger in 2010 with a few friends at UCLA, and this organization has grown onto more than 120 university campuses, serving 2 million nourishing meals to students in need. Their innovative approach allows university students to donate unused funds from their meal plans to food insecure peers. In 2017, Rachel wrote the Hunger Free Campus Act, which the state of California passed and has since sent over $50 million+ to anti-hunger programs on campuses. We're excited to have all of our panelists with us and are confident that you will find today's conversation both enjoyable and fruitful. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you will be able to ask questions via the Zoom chat function. We'll be dedicating time on our webinar to answering some, if not all, of your queries. With all that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary K. Michelson, funder and founder of the Michelson 20mm Foundation, who will share welcoming remarks. Dr. Michelson.
Good morning and welcome. In 1948, the United Nations issued its Declaration of Human Rights, which included amongst its 30 elements a right to education. There was, however, no mention of a right to food or shelter, so one can only assume that these were held as a given. Now, I will posit that the most successful government program ever has been the GI Bill of Rights. But let me put this in context. In last year's Democratic presidential debates, there was much back and forth about free college for all. Free college for all. If a person can be educated as to have increased earnings over their lifetime of work, and the government taxes those enhanced earnings, then there was nothing free about that education. Perhaps it would be better then to label that as a no tuition education. Now, there's a story about a neurosurgeon who was home on a Sunday morning waiting for his favorite team to play on television when his house went dark. He found a 24/7 electrician who came out and fixed the problem. He handed the doctor the bill. The doctor was aghast. He said, "My man, you are charging me more as an electrician than I charge by the hour as a neurosurgeon." To which the electrician responded, "Yes, that is why I gave up neurosurgery." The point is, and there is a point, not everyone should go to college, though everyone should have the opportunity to acquire a skill or a trade. So it is not college, it is not free, and it is not for everyone, which brings us back to the GI Bill and why we are here today. The bill did more than just cover tuition. Additionally, it provided sufficient means to provide for food and shelter. Now, this experiment has been run on the grandest of scales. The return on investment is no less than $7 back to the government for each $1 invested, which means the money expended is not a cost, but rather an investment. And that does not capture the social benefits to the participants and by extension to their families of a derived higher standard of living. Perhaps part of the task at hand then is simply to have government, which ostensibly exists to serve the people, act upon the certain knowledge that feeding and housing this nation's students is not just socially and morally correct, it is economically compelling. I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Dr. Michelson, I'll turn it over now to Rachel Sumek. Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are Zooming in from. Thank you so much to the Michelson 20mm Foundation and Mikael for that wonderful and warm intro and for hosting this conversation today. I hope that this is an engaging one. I'm going to try and ask questions to Dr. Crutchfield and Dr. Goldrick Rabb that maybe they're not usually asked, questions that go beyond the typical panel questions. And I hope that you help me with that by jumping into the Q&A and staying active in the chat so we can get to the real conversation that many of us want to have today. So with that, let's jump in. And I know we have folks on the line with a range of exposure to what college student basic needs even means. So let's start with that. I would love to hear from both of you. Why are we addressing the issue of student basic needs? Why is it so important? And where are our campuses and us as a greater society falling short in meeting the needs of college students?
So maybe I'll jump in. And we all know you can call me Rashida, right? So I'm really, really happy to be here and grateful for the village, as Ruben would say, our friend Ruben would say, in bringing us here together to talk about these important issues. I think the tagline for this session, and also drawing from Sarah and her team's great work, is that we really have to see students as humans, right? And we have to understand that in the K-12 community, it's clear that if students aren't well, if students aren't healthy, if they don't have food, if they don't have housing, it is impossible to learn. And we, I think, by given granted for being here today, understand that education, as Dr. Michelson so well said, is such a propel for moving forward to economic and social stability, that doesn't change after you graduate from high school, that you must have your basic needs, really focused in on food and housing, but also, we know COVID has really highlighted that our technology is so important, our care to mental health is so important, and our access to childcare too. Sarah, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I think that's a tremendous introduction to the challenge. And another way of thinking about this is simply Maslow before Bloom. And K-12 education, like Rashida said, has understood this and understood this well for frankly more than 100 years. I don't think there are too many of us who think that the National School Lunch Program and what it brought to this nation was a mistake. Dr. Michelson's exactly right, of course, about the GI Bill. In fact, the entire reason for my career comes from the fact that my grandfather went to college on the GI Bill, and spoke, by the way, about the fact that when the GIs went to college, they did get these living expenses addressed. But the needs for basic supports have to come from an ecosystem that provides those supports. And when the children of the wealthy go to college, the ecosystem is largely provided by their families. They provide the backdrop. It's not that they go through college without food. It's not that they go through college without getting emergency aid. It's just that we don't call it that because they don't need the government for it. So basic needs security means there's an ecosystem in place that ensures that the fundamentals are met. And right now we're not in a situation where that is occurring. And it's a leading reason why so many students don't start college. And among those who do, they don't finish. Very inefficient.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you help bring light to a lot in your speaking and writing, Dr. Sarah, is this notion of having some college, no degree, but having this huge amount of debt associated with that. And I think, in this moment, so many folks who were so close to graduating are now, with the pandemic, having to choose work to support their families. And that is only going to become more exacerbated. I remember in an early interview that you had in the pandemic, Sarah, you said, I can't remember exactly the question that you were asked, but someone asked, like, what's the good thing that's going to happen from this? And you're like, well, maybe schools will start to think, do my students have housing? Do my students have food? Because the pandemic has really brought that question to the forefront. And I know we're seeing—
and that's a good thing. It's a good thing, but it's a sad way that this had to happen, right, Rachel? This is a tragedy.
Totally. And now the question is, will that actually happen? We're seeing, university systems announce in the fall that yes, we will be back in person. Will that awareness, like you're both, both national leaders and on the ground on campuses, a part of important university systems, are we seeing that awareness start to permeate through forms and through emails in the way that our campuses are communicating our students? Should we be hopeful that that awareness is here to stay?
I'll say from my vantage point, when I look at the data, I see the awareness growing and I see the actions being taken, in part because we get so many requests for technical assistance at the Hope Center. And so just the inbound by itself, the requests for how do we do an effective emergency aid program? How do we expand SNAP access? And that, I'm so glad when I get those calls, because of course, philanthropy and those emergency aid dollars are never going to be enough. We have to get the federal government involved. The fact that they're so interested is really, really key. Now, the problem, of course, is that hardly anybody is actually providing funds for that skilling up that does need to occur. You know, in the hunger-free campus legislation in California, there was flexibility and sufficient funding that some schools used it for that, right? To help advance staff skills and to rethink, you know, even staffing models. But in most of the rest of the country, that has not occurred. So I do want to note that while this is important to institutions' bottom lines, really understanding higher ed finance right now also means in some ways this is an unfunded mandate. And it's on the federal government to really ensure that in whatever comes next, whether it's the stimulus or whether it's the other legislation that we're working on, that we take seriously the idea that, you know, we teach differently and we staff differently, we support students differently in 2021 than we did in 1980. And maybe it is worth investing in professional development.
I think I'll just add that I think that, I mean, it's clear that, you know, being virtual has brought us into each other's homes in so many ways. And I think really has been in some ways shocking for those who really either were not thinking about these issues or started to think about these issues, but didn't really understand. I think for a lot of us sitting, you know, for me, I'm a tenured faculty person. And so I've been safe in my home for quite a long time, but I know that on the other side of my screen, metaphorically, are my students, some of which turn off their cameras because they don't want to see me every day, but others turn off their cameras because they can't. They can't show or don't want to show what they have going on in their homes. And the forced invitation of the pandemic for students has, I think, for some of us really been enlightening and shifting from thinking about basic needs to essential needs. I really appreciate the dialogue that we're having nationally in our states and locally around equity. And yet we really have to connect basic needs security to this equity lens, right? Because if we're really talking about addressing equity in our education and really, you know, emphasizing that in the missions of our institutions, we have to think about who experiences these problems, who experiences barriers to basic needs. And if we're going to address equity, then this is fundamental to achieving those missions. I do think, I mean, clearly, as Sarah mentioned, California, the state legislature and our governor have invested in this issue. This year, we're getting ongoing funds in the University of California system and the CSU system, and then some ongoing funds, but one-time funds for our community colleges. We do represent a lot of students, and our alumni there represent a lot of who we are and who makes California. So we have this investment that's a great start, and we have opportunities for more.
Yeah, and I gotta say, sitting across the country from you, not only do I miss out on your amazing beaches, but Pennsylvania is in a radically different boat, right? We have faced nothing but state defunding for quite a long time. We have not passed a Hunger-Free Campus Act, although I am appreciative that we do have a representative who is a Temple alum who is pursuing it with us. But from where we sit, we too have put equity promoting activities in place, including that at Temple University, we're test optional, right? Which is terrific. And, you know, another thing that's been happening during the pandemic is people are waking up to the fact that standardized tests don't necessarily promote equity. So I have a lot of students in my classroom from places like North Philadelphia who are so happy to have this shot. But this semester, as I taught them, did not struggle with the material. They struggled to pay rent. They struggled to feed their kids, right? 14% of my class this semester lost someone they loved to COVID. And those ongoing health concerns, while new in terms of COVID, in the past, it's been cancer. We have to go further to support them. We've always been an institution that supports working class students, and that's what this means now.
Absolutely. I think what both of you touch on, and again, is in your writing, is the inequity and looking at who are the demographics and who need more support. And it's not about equality, but really that equity. And so much of what got Swipe Out Hunger off the ground was that experience of leaving class and some students going into a state-of-the-art dining hall with everything you can imagine, from like make your own omelet option. And at the same time, I remember UCLA was starting our food closet on campus. It's like 2009, 2010. And the food closet was in a basement, underground, unmarked, with no refrigeration. It was just, and I was like, we have 5 incredible dining halls. And you think that the solution to hunger is to open up a little closet. And, it's been a decade since, and we're starting to make, the pantry is being remodeled right now. There's plenty of protein happening now. But that equity, if we have that lens as the way that we're coming up with our solutions, then we can actually create solutions that meet students' needs. In our surveys every year, what Swipe Out Hunger does is a lot of things, but primarily allowing college students to donate the extra money from their meal plan to their peers who are food insecure. And when we do our student survey at the end of the year and we ask students, how did this help you? They say, yeah, it helped me focus more in school. I was able to wake up with energy and work out in the morning. But really the biggest difference that students report is a sense of inclusion on campus. And the feeling that, yeah, like this place really is made for me. This school does want me to be here and students like me to be here. And of course, as you both mentioned, so much of that community and sense of inclusion is lost when we're back at home in our apartments, in our homes with our siblings, and the ability to focus is gone. So
yeah, let me just flag real quick, Rachel. It's also lost when the schools don't even have cafeterias, right? So I think a lot about the nation's community colleges, very few of whom can offer that. And the extent to which the inclusion opportunities simply don't happen, right? They can't come through that. So I think you're raising something really important.
Absolutely. And I know our community colleges have been at the forefront in a lot of ways of developing the solutions, of being the most, like the prioritization of dollars at the community college level is unmatched and should be a model for the rest of our schools. On that note, you both touched on policy, so I'd love to shift and zoom out and ask the most obvious question, which is, what can we anticipate with this change in administration at the federal level? Like, our hopes are high. Sarah, I was already complaining to you that it's been 2 days and student debt hasn't been canceled. What's going on? So I'm excited about the change in administration, but I want to know, from your all's much more realistic positioning, what might be possible.
Well, I know it's hard for everybody. The student debt hasn't been canceled yet. I do think, I will just say for this administration, boy, do they have their hands full. And I think one of the challenges is not knowing even all of the things that they're going to have to attend to, that they're going to discover on a daily basis. But I will say that what we always look for those of us working on policy change, is what we call the Overton window. When the Overton window opens, it's our job to be prepared to go through it. This is the window of opportunity. And at a moment when we have Dr. Biden, sorry, we have my dog barking in the background. When we have Dr. Biden there, when we have Vice President Harris, who has authored the Basic Act there, when we have, a welcoming Department of Education, Department of Housing and Urban Development, when we have both houses of Congress with members that are interested here, this is the time. Now, the key is to advance the things that really will last and make a difference. So, the Hope Center has built out a policy and advocacy team that we're trying to rapidly scale right now, because when the feds call, you want to say yes, and right after this, we're briefing the Office of Management and Budget. We're going to be talking about the following kinds of things. The current financial aid system is woefully inadequate. And I mean the very structures, okay? Calls to simply double Pell will not just address sufficiently, frankly, in any way, these basic needs issues, because Pell cuts off a lot of students who have significant need. We need to expand the National School Lunch Program to higher education. We need to drop work requirements for public benefits programs that acknowledge that college is work, okay? We also need to go further in terms of creating incentives for things like affordable housing. The low-income housing tax credit is not a perfect program, but it's especially imperfect because full-time college students are treated as ineligible. So in other words, we need government agencies to work together. And that very framework, which says that all of these problems are not going to only be addressed through higher ed policy as classically conceived is the thing that we need to take hold. So I think there are a lot of really good folks there. I was really pleased by some of the appointments, people who really use scientific evidence to make change. And I really want to underline also those who understand that the investment that Dr. Michelson was talking about is not merely an economic investment in the classic sense. This isn't just about individuals' wages. This is about their health and well-being. And we all know what happens in this country when people are not healthy and are not well. We can intervene at the college level to make a major difference in their overall lives and the lives of their kids and grandkids. Rashida.
Yeah, I'll add, thank you. I like snaps, Rachel and I both. And I bet you in the background here, along with the many higher ed policies that you're offering us, Sarah, I would add in housing, looking at the, at HUD, we're excited about the nomination of Marcia Fudge. And thinking about, one, making sure that policy addresses long-term inequity in housing and housing access, and doing quite a lot of healing in the discrimination that people have faced as they've tried to access housing, whether or not they have the resources to have it. Maxine Waters is looking to fund Section 8 for the people who need it. And just, in those policies, but also in many of the policies that Sarah has lifted up, I really want to see us getting direction and funding for the implementation of these powerful policies. We want new policies, but we also need direction and funding for implementation of the policies that we've been able to achieve, right? So we've done some great work around looking at making sure that students get access to financial aid, but still financial aid administrators are doing their best, but at sometimes in this conflicting position where they, one, want to be gatekeepers of money, and two, want to be supportive of students, and those two motivations conflict and become barriers to students getting the support that they need. And we end up adding layers of validation or requirements for students. And so we really need direction and support so that even if the policies exist, that the students still benefit from them.
Yeah, and you're speaking to administrative burden, which is a problem across our social programs, right? And, let's take what you just said there. I don't know how many people realize, but even as the Pell Grant has grown over time, so that, it's become thousands and thousands of dollars, institutions only get on average $5 to administer a Pell Grant, okay? So if the administrative cost allowances are so low, how well do you think they'll be administered? And this goes to something else that we've been working on with Michelson 20MM, which is around emergency aid. If the feds just poured billions, tens of billions of dollars, not tens, sorry, about $6 billion. I wish it was tens of billions. That's what they need to do, into federal emergency aid. But they suggested to institutions that they only needed to spend about 2% on the actual administration. Well, that's how we get research results like we recently have at the Hope Center, where we find that institutions are taking about 13 days to respond to a student's emergency. That's not going to be effective. It's not going to address their basic needs. We know we can do this within 48 hours, but I don't know why we want to pretend like high quality service is free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I want to stay here on what you both just said of the actual implementation of policy. We all want to dream up the best policy, but I think the Hunger Free Campus Act, I'm playing, for everyone's knowledge, I'm playing a moderator and panelist role here, so I'll be contributing throughout. I just couldn't pass up the chance to also moderate this. So I remember when we passed it, there was this initial just joy of we got this bill passed. And then immediately this realization that who is going to tell all of these CSUs and 100 plus community colleges and all these UCs that this just passed and what they need to do to be eligible, and then how to best use those dollars? And the answer was obviously no one. No one is there to tell these people that this just happened. So it was me literally hiring an additional staff person, going to meet with whoever at the CSU system, at the community college system, the UC system, was like actually talking to people on the ground, because the government affairs people, you know, were like in Sacramento making sure this happened, but they're on to the next bill, right? They don't even have time to help. So the communication element here of even now what we're seeing with the the last COVID funding bill expanded SNAP for so many college students, right? As long as you're eligible for work study, you can get access to SNAP, no longer having this draconian 20-hour-a-week work requirement. Our students in New York have been trying to get students enrolled in SNAP. And of course, there's been zero communication with the state or the state between the CUNY system of how to do this. It literally, you cannot, it doesn't exist. In California, our advocates are underway. It's like gonna come out soon. We're gonna use it as a model. But if our students weren't pushing in New York, Lord knows when it would happen, if at all, right? So I would love to hear after my rant, just like what your all's more professional take on this is in terms of how we as activists who are so proactive about pushing for change and getting these changes, you know, passed, what that communication can look like if it was more effective between getting the policy passed to actual implementation.
Sure. Well, let me just say, so it's great when students fill in, right, in these gaps, in these holes that are being left by flawed government policies that include an inattention or insufficient attention to implementation, right? But we definitely need something better and something more, frankly, sustainable. The way that we're kind of trying to approach that is to kind of marry, we do what we call action research, which for us in this case means, okay, first of all, we have to really understand the problem. And that means understanding all of the elements of the implementation that are not working well, right? Everything from the learning costs that students face to figuring out the program even exists, to the application issues, right? To figuring out the eligibility, the compliance part is a huge part of what drags down higher education. You know, the stacks of rules and regulations and reporting and such. But the question is really what the most effective approaches to that outreach are, what the most cost-effective approaches are, getting the evidence on those approaches, and then working to get those included in legislation, right? And the tricky thing, and I'm sorry, I have a very large Great Dane rescue over here who is going to be noisy, so I'm going to turn my thing off in a second and deal with that. But you know, it is essential. And if you look at the HUD programs that Rashida was referring to earlier, they have the same flaws. They'll allow like 5% administrative cost administration for homelessness programs. They clearly need more. Let me turn this off, Rashida, and deal with that.
Thanks, Sarah. I do want to call up again the advocacy of students, right? And you know, we clearly in the CSU had an advocate in former Chancellor Tim White, and hopefully continue to have an advocate in Joseph Castro. But really the reason we have so much funding for basic needs in California is because students continue to keep our feet to the fire, period. If you know, in the media, in our homes, you know, on campus, at the chancellor's office, students really have driven the support that we have for basic needs in California. That said, then I think also from them has built this community of folks who also then carry it through, right? And are on campus doing the work and continually doing the work. Sometimes they're groups of folks, like, you know, for me at Long Beach State, we have a family of folks who are a team that are working. And then sometimes it's a campus where it's one person, right? One person who's tasked with being the representative for basic needs for a campus of thousands of people. And so we really have to, along with, as Sarah's saying, making sure that we have the funding for the administrative work of developing, implementing, sustaining, and evaluating programs. We also have to support those folks for real, not just in name, but in real practice, who are doing the work with students and showing up, I think, we have historically, similar to how we address issues of race and inequality around race and disability, and other marginalized groups, just like that, we have to know that it can't be on the head of one person, that it has to be a full effort across many systems, including inside and outside educational institutions.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to know, from what you're seeing in the CSU system, there's been a lot of movement around addressing homelessness among students specifically, and at least a lot since your research, prior to your research coming out. And I think people would be interested to know, what are you seeing? What strides are being done to address student homelessness?
This is my favorite question right now, because we have so many interesting opportunities in the CSU and in the community colleges and the UCs, right? So our college-focused rapid rehousing program really has been a big shift. I think, for a long time, and still for a lot of people, crisis response has been the go-to, right? And I think that's a natural response. Like, you're hungry, let me give you some food. And I think that that's great, right? If I'm hungry, don't talk to me about systems, give me some food, right? But once we get that going, we have to think about long-term. I think for a lot of us, thinking about housing is the scariest thing. And I saw someone in one of the questions, right? Like, for a lot of us at the community college level, we don't have housing. We can't put someone up for 2 weeks. It's great if universities do, and we want that. We want that. Don't hear me saying we don't want that, because we absolutely want that. But what do we do as community colleges? But even if you have that, 2 weeks doesn't stop someone from being homeless. And in fact, in the homelessness realm outside of institutions, we know that emergency response really doesn't have long-term impacts for people who are experiencing homelessness, even intermittent homelessness or chronic homelessness. It is the investment of long-term support, not only in terms of housing, but also mental health and educational wellness and physical wellness, that have to be in place as well. So we were funded by the state. So the CSU was funded $6.5 million, the community colleges $9 million, and the UC's $3.5 million to do this college-focused rapid rehousing, which is a huge shift. And essentially, we understand as academic institutions that we can't know how to do everything. And we really have to have genuine integrated partnerships with community-based partners that are funded, right? And so we, for instance, at Long Beach State, we are connected to Homelessness Inc., which is an institution in Southern California that's been providing housing and homeless services for youth for years. And now we identify students on our campus, or virtually, as the case may be right now, and then refer them to Homelessness, and then they find housing for those students and subsidize housing long-term until that student can take on their own rent or otherwise find stable housing. Again, it's great to put someone up for 10 days, and we want to do that, but then we have to have this ongoing stability opportunity for our students. And I think that's a game changer for us. And now the work is making sure that it works. So evaluating it and really thinking about what are the nuances to ensure that the people who really need the support are getting it, and getting it in the way that it's really, truly helpful.
Yeah, I want to underline that last point. For the last 3 years or so, the Hope Center has been leading an evaluation supported by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, along with a number of foundations. And we've been looking at what happens if public housing authorities get involved in some of the work that, Rashida's referring to there, which is really important, because that's a whole other, pot of money and a frame of support. And we've been looking at primarily at voucher-driven models, where people get like Section 8. Students are becoming newly eligible for Section 8, and the information that we're getting from that is that, first of all, the students really do genuinely need the housing. It's very well confirmed, but accessing Section 8 is just as hard for college students as it is for everybody else. And in fact, in some ways harder if the college doesn't fully have the resources it needs to actually set the student up to succeed in the search for Section 8 housing, right? And so that lesson has been really important. And, you know, I think that we're looking more now at place-based models. You know, I think you're going to see an evolution. There's the real potential for an evolution in higher ed housing lessons, the way there's been in the broader field of housing research, which is crucial. And I will say the good news is that even under the last administration, there were conversations about this at the federal level. And they've been exploring, you know, concepts like a VASH style voucher, like we have for veterans, you know, talking about any modifications that would need to be made to Section 8. I think, you know, the key here is to keep this moving and to ensure that the current administration, both in DC and around the country, you know, really, again, does some of the things that, again, thankfully, California is doing.
I'm very happy to have California continue to be a model for us using our tax dollars in great ways, like supporting students' basic needs. I want to open it up for Q&A soon, and I see there's some in the chat and some coming through the Q&A function. And just like briefly recap some of the points that we've talked about today. I think one of the strongest points you both made clear in the beginning is the administrative challenge of our schools getting ready for this moment, having the training, having the resources to even show up for students once they recognize and acknowledge, fine, this is an issue that is happening. And, you know, there's a question about addressing people who don't think that this is something that's, you know, outside of the scope of the university. This shouldn't be. So once we even acknowledge that it is, the funding and training to make sure our campuses systemically are ready for this. And then also talking about the need for funding for things in general, as well as student advocates and access to housing. And I want to ask a few rapid fire questions before we open it up for Q&A. And again, throw them in the chat. And also such wonderful shout outs to our friends at Homelessness and Sam Prater and so many amazing organizations in LA, LA Women Board, who are doing this work and testing these models. Our team every week reads a different article and has like a theme of the week. And the article this week was around free breakfast at schools and how free breakfast at school actually started as a movement by the Black Panthers in Oakland, getting this to be a resource. And then once the federal government was looking for solutions, the committee came across this program that had already been proven and tested and run for decades by the Black Panthers. And now we have this amazing federally funded program. So, you know, the way that change happens is sometimes on the ground, people testing in foundations, investing in riskier appearing things. You know, one of my questions, get ready, is where can foundations be investing right now to really show up for students' basic needs? Making those more risky investments in non-traditional ideas that then eventually, after you all test and research them, could be models for policy for us to adopt. So my first quick question before we open it up is, other than, in addition to your books and your writings, what's one or two other books that you recommend people who are watching read, whether for on this issue or just that you're loving right now?
Rashida, do you want to go first? Or I'm happy to go. Okay, so I have two right off the bat. Scarcity by Sendil Mullainathan, which helps people really understand why I have to quote the Wu-Tang all the time. Cash rules everything around me, okay? Because it's the science behind living without enough money. And Administrative Burden by Pam Hurd and Don Moynihan, two professors who were colleagues of mine at Wisconsin-Madison, are now at Georgetown, hopefully having a big influence on DC policy.
I love those. And I'm going to add some fiction to the mix, right? So I'm a huge fan of Octavia Butler, and Parable of the Sower really spoke to what I feel like we've been through for the past 4 years, even though that writing took place far before. And I feel like it gives context to what we've been through and also the healing that we are going to need for transformation upcoming. And I also actually want to add Going Public by Michael Geekin, because I'm a social worker, but I'm an organizer by trade. And so I really think we have done a lot of really great organizing in community to get us to this place. And because we have this window of opportunity for change, we still have to stay moving, and the lessons of our organizing family are there for us.
Absolutely. And again, to plug, as you mentioned, students and student organizing, I'm always reminded when our students advocate of Brian Stevenson's concept of proximity, because they are so proximate to their friends who they sit next to and text every day, who are going hungry. They don't care what our timelines are and what building is being built. And so we got to put things on pause. They take action, and that proximity and organizing mentality is such a driver of that. Okay, next question is, what if you remember in college or even now, your favorite late night cheap study food?
Oh, pizza, which I can't have anymore. But yeah, definitely, usually that was the thing. And if I'm going to gross you out, we would put butter on it the next day and then put it back in the toaster oven.
So I waited tables about 40 hours a week all during college, and usually until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So whatever I was going to eat was going to be whatever I brought home left over from the restaurant. So sometimes like buffalo wings, and it was always very unhealthy foods, but you know, it fit the need.
And now to my question, which I tried to prompt you for before, what would be ways that you would recommend funders invest their dollars right now to support basic needs?
We keep passing it to each other. All right, look, I kind of put this into 2 buckets, right? There are a lot of people out there who, you know, want to do checkbook activism, right? They want to be able to help somebody immediately. Those people, I believe, should be putting their dollars in emergency aid, because frankly, cash is king and it is the most flexible thing. Students can use it for a variety of needs, whether that's childcare, mental health, housing, food, whatever. But I also really do firmly believe that we need to create systemic change. And that means that we have to have policy analytic work going on that is evidence driven. Deep policy analysis and the crafting of legislation by those analysts will allow us to get to a better place where we don't have this administrative burden going on in the implementation of programs, right? And where programs can actually, and departments can collaborate. So that's been something that frankly has been a learning for me. If I looked at my work 10 years ago, you know, I kind of knew what the problem was and I would advise on legislation and such. Today, I look at what Carrie Welton on our team and her policy team can do, and I'm noticing that the much more nuanced and really detailed, but therefore time consuming, right, analytic work that they're doing could actually mean that students would be okay for generations. So I'm excited and glad to be in a position to try to advance that work.
Along with the suggestions offered by Sarah, I think, you know, funding creative programs in direct practice is really helpful. Models like, I think, you know, looking at what's happened at Cerritos College with Jóvenes, led by Dr. Dilcy Perez, you know, they're finding and sustaining housing opportunities for students that people said 2 years ago were impossible. Like what we've said was impossible is possible. And so finding these really innovative programs is so important. I also want to double down on those unrestricted funds to make sure that programs are administered well. And then looking at, you know, the evaluation piece. We often want to put those dollars directly in the hands of students, and I want to see that happen. I also want to make sure as we're doing it that it's working, and that our best practices really are doing what we say we're doing. I think that as I said, I feel strongly that having food pantries is really important, but I think food pantries become our flagship, our sacred cow. And then we have to think about who is it reaching? How is it reaching? I think, you know, sometimes when we start programs of direct service, we also want to add these layers of restriction that we talked about earlier to access to things like emergency grants and pantries. And I think that evidence and research really can show us that an expanded approach really is the most effective way to reach students.
Thank you both so much. I'd love to get to some of the questions that folks are asking. And if someone from the Michelson 20mm team wants to go through the chat or the Q&A and DM me some of the ones you want me to, I know there's been a bunch sprinkled throughout, that would be great. But I see this one here from Adrienne where she asks, can you speak on the role of case management, mentoring services in this conversation? For instance, helping youth address stress, building healthy coping skills, navigating systems, as a first-gen student. And I know, Rashida, having a degree in social work, you probably have some thoughts on this.
I have a few. Yeah, while you mention it, I think really what a lot of people are finding out, really realizing that addressing the symptom is not going to help students, right? And so if you've had a student who's been experiencing homelessness off and on for the last, well, even for a month or even for a few days, but longer still, that getting them into housing is not the end of what we have to do for those students. I have found a number of students telling us, I was holding things together tight while I was homeless. I was just pushing. I was just finding that next place to stay or that next thing to eat and going to class, and I was holding it together. And when my housing came together, that's when I fell apart. That's when I realized the level of trauma that I had been experiencing. And so then I needed support through counseling services. And also I realized, I've been hustling with all these gig opportunities and trying to pull together money, but I really needed to figure out how to get sustainable employment. And there's all these great programs on campus, but I've never had time to look for them because that hustle of finding a place to stay was my full-time job along with these other jobs that I had. And so how do I get those? And those case managers really make it happen for students. They build that relationship and that connection. They help them, the students themselves, build the connections they've been missing because they've been moving at such a high level. And they make sure that they're linked to the programs that we do have available that are sometimes very hidden. And they may also, because students are slowly being able to capture their time back now that they're getting some stability, they can also find resources that they maybe knew were available. Like applying for a scholarship sometimes is just as much work as just going to work every day. And so helping them navigate those skills is really important, and navigating those journeys.
I want to just add to that I think that it's also really important that we do some more professional development for today's faculty who are really on the front lines and in the classrooms with students and don't know much of the first thing about what trauma-informed pedagogy looks like. At the Hope Center, we talk a lot about a culture of caring, and this is not a soft and warm and fuzzy thing. This is about doing effective teaching in 2021. I think most people don't realize that today's faculty are often hired with very limited teaching experience and teacher training and get very little professional development. And also, frankly, that they are not supported as humans. So we're seeing this problem right now where faculty and staff are also dealing with mental health crises, are also dealing with basic needs insecurity. We just did a survey revealing both of those things, and they're not going to be effective in their teaching with students if this doesn't happen. There are a lot of microaggressions here that can occur in classrooms in very unintended ways that will drive a student to not only drop a class, but drop straight out of school. And they have racially disparate impact. And I think that we would be remiss, to not really, I hope the federal legislation will really lean into improving the instructional workforce.
Yeah, and I'm seeing this question here around basic needs tend to impact students of color relatively more. And how important do you think representation in the basic needs staff and faculty are with working with students? And I want to lift up some work that Swipe Out Hunger and Rise did this summer of hiring actual college students many of whom have lived experience, to help other students navigate things like unemployment insurance and SNAP and other resources. And now we just launched a similar network serving students at the CUNYs. And while it isn't full-time case management and the wraparound support which so many students need, the simple notion that hiring people who have lived experience, hiring people who come from communities which are often seeking support, has a huge impact in a student's ability to even not have the stigma of asking for help stop them, and then the support that they get feeling so much more nourishing and helpful and not triggering. It really, yeah, I can't even speak to it. Those moments really stay with you, I think.
So I want to underline that and say we've actually been thinking on some somewhat similar lines because one of our goals is to reach the communities in North Philadelphia, where our offices are located and where Temple is located. And one of the things that we're really conscious of is we've thought about using students, but I also have to say there are a lot of people out there with high school degrees who have not been able to enroll in college. And there are professions that they can engage in, such as community health work, where they can also address students' basic needs. And if they are employed by an institution, it can also be a pathway to actually get a degree themselves. So we have a pending funding application, and we're hoping to kind of do an expansion where we work out what it would look like to create a career pathway for community health workers in higher education, and whether in fact that could be very effective for our students. And I think we have to think about things like these. Frankly, we also have to think about it because the costs are different. The cost of employing a community health worker is different than employing somebody with an MSW, for example. But also there is a much bigger group of people who are much more diverse in their backgrounds who are eligible then for the jobs.
Well said. I know we're coming up on time, so I'll ask one of the questions in the chat from Matthew Taylor of what do you say to colleagues or administrators who see this work as outside the scope of higher education and feel our institutions are being asked to do too much? Do you answer with the head, with the heart, with the data? I feel like there's so many arguments.
Yeah, I think I have to acknowledge first that many of us are stretched very thin and are being asked and tasked to do many things. And so starting with the heart helps me not get mad, right, when that question is posed, because I think that's real, that when I'm talking to my colleague who is not necessarily trained to support a student if they disclose. If a student comes to him and says, hey, I don't have a place to live, and he stops short because he's not sure what to do, he is both learning how to be in the classroom, and now he's thinking, oh, now I have to also be a social worker, right? And so I think there's some fear about not being able to know what to do, which often I'm a sci-fi geek. So Yoda says fear turns to anger, right? And so I think that, acknowledging that is really important. And then I say, people cannot learn if they don't have their basic needs met. I know right now it's about time for me to have lunch and I'm starting to get a little cranky, right? And I think that when people understand that from a human standpoint, we have to understand that if my mission is to educate, my mission is also to support the human being that's being educated.
Yeah, I say similar things. I would just also add that let's be clear about what the ask is here. We're not asking to turn colleges and universities into social service agencies, not even in the least. Just like the community schools movement in K-12 education, we're asking for a broader conceptualization of who the community and ecosystem can be to support the whole student. That means more partnerships. It's important what Rashida said earlier. I want to underline the Rapid Rehousing Partnership. That's terrific. That was not an institution saying, I'm going to go build, more housing and somehow fund it. And by the way, most housing operations on college campuses lose money. That's a dirty little secret. It's not really a secret. So, I really think that partnering, and that also includes at the state and federal level. So part of the job is not the partnership that happens on the campus, it's the blending and braiding of funding in the back end. It's the alignment of funding streams so that they can work better together. But I also think it's important to give them a sense of historical context, right? Imagine how many times we've said in K-12 education, poverty is not our fault and it is not our job to address it. How's that going? It doesn't work, right? There are very, very few schools that would honestly say, we don't need to have that school breakfast program. We don't need to have homeless support services. It's not our mission, right? They may feel these things are underfunded, and they are, but very few would say we don't need a school nurse. In fact, we need more of them. And we have the same issue. These issues do not stop when one becomes an adult.
And at the risk of having another Star Wars reference be included in this, I feel like the idea of, one of the things that, our friend Ruben, who we named earlier, brings up is many of the people who are seeking to do this work have gone through this trauma themselves. And we need to have that training and support happen so we don't reimpose those, like the hazing or this is a part of the trauma you have to go through. Like Darth Vader is not the Jedi that should be training people, right? We need like a healthy, lightful Jedis out there training our community, and not being afraid of having that conversation with, obviously our universities being in a position to be able to step in and have those meaningful conversations. I'm very hopeful that everyone took notes throughout this, and if not, you should catch the recording after, because just those last few minutes of advice of how to speak to universities, as well as everything that's been shared, has been so valuable. And I hope folks have gotten a lot out of this conversation. In addition to hope, right? This is an issue that can be solved, that's seen incredible progress just in the past decade. And a lot of that because of the really collaborative and wonderful funders on this call and hosting this call that have helped make this work happen. So shout out to all the funders who I see on the call who help bolster all of this work, and the students who drive us as leaders to make sure that we continue going. So I am going to hand it back to Miguel, I think, who's going to introduce some really wonderful and exciting organizations and work from their end.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for sharing their wisdom and expertise with us this morning. In 2021, the Michelson 20MM Foundation is doubling down on its commitment to help students meet their basic needs. As we mentioned earlier today, we are officially launching our Student Basic Needs Initiative and invite everyone in attendance to join us on this journey to see students as humans first. Our initiative will center around innovation, research, systems change, policy, and programs that address some of the most pressing challenges faced by students. To do so, we have identified 5 amazing partners through our Michelson Spark Grant initiative that will help us empower students, uplift their voices, and ensure that their needs are met. In no particular order, I introduce you to Laura Zabel-Kubitz, Associate Director of the Institute for College Access and Success, also known as TICAS, who will be sharing more about TICAS and the work they'll be doing through their Spark Grant.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Zabel-Kubitz. I'm with the Institute for College Access and Success, or TICAS, a research, design, and advocacy organization that focuses on student-centered public policies that promote affordability, accountability, and equity in higher education. We are thrilled to be a Michelson Spark Grant recipient, and through it seek to better understand how COVID-19 has impacted California college students' ability to afford and succeed in college. College affordability directly impacts completion rates, and COVID-19 has only exacerbated long-standing affordability challenges, particularly for low-income and underrepresented students. With insufficient need-based financial aid available to cover total college costs, including basic needs, students often turn to loans or work. However, depressed economic opportunities mean many have lost their jobs or face reduced hours, and the ongoing crisis has also resulted in additional expenses and challenges, including those associated with online learning. To get a more detailed picture of the financial and personal challenges college students are facing during this crisis and the choices they are in turn making, we are surveying students throughout the state about their experiences. We look forward to learning from them to identify equitable and actionable solutions that change makers can support to ensure all Californians, and our most vulnerable especially, are able to successfully afford and earn a higher education credential. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Laura. Next, we have Marcos Montes, Program Manager and Higher Ed Policy Consultant at the Southern California College Access Network, SoCalCan. Marcos.
Hi, thank you, Miguel. Hi, everybody. So in the summer of 2020, SoCalCan launched Let's Go to College, California, a student-led virtual hub that prioritizes student needs during COVID and promotes resources to support all students on their journey to pursue a higher education. Through our virtual hub, students are building community, spotlighting their needs, and assessing higher education's response to the pandemic. Time and time again, college affordability, basic needs, and mental health have risen to the top of the list. To complement our virtual hub and our growing online community, we're launching a basic needs fellowship to amplify student voices and address the basic needs crisis caused by non-tuition costs of going to college. Fellows will be trained to raise awareness of SNAP benefits and will educate the general public and decision makers regarding the challenges students are facing meeting their basic needs. Our fellowship aims to uplift student voices, develop their advocacy skills, and prepare them to create change. We are very excited to be part of this Spark Grants initiative and partner with all the organizations involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. Next, we have Nadia Leal Carrillo, Director of Policy Development at the Success Center for California Community Colleges. Nadia.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you everybody for this opportunity. The Student Success Center provides strategic thought partnership through professional development, policy development, and special projects to implement large-scale system-wide student success reforms aligned with the system's strategic plan, the Vision for Success goals. The Chancellor's Office is leading a system-wide effort to address basic needs. The purpose of this project is to identify opportunities to streamline and coordinate state public benefits for students so that they receive all aid for which they are entitled to and to support their educational goals. This effort will be informed by critical research funded by the Spark Grant, and will be analyzing the current public benefits eligibility, application, and renewal requirements that limit a student's access to public benefits. This cross-agency work is new and will help ensure students are holistically and equitably supported. But more importantly, this program or this project is really part of a transformational and systemic change aimed at creating the infrastructure needed in the CCC system to better serve our diverse student population. Thank you all again, and thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to furthering this work.
Thank you, Nadia. Next, we have Evelyn Klaus, Development Associate at California State University, Long Beach. Evelyn.
Thank you, Miguel, for the warm introduction. Cal State Long Beach serves over 39,000 students, and CSULB's Division of Student Affairs mission is to support the holistic development of students to progress through and graduate from Cal State Long Beach by providing programs and services that encourage access and retention, health and wellness, and engagement of all students. We're particularly interested in looking at how subpopulations of students and intersectionalities of students are disproportionately impacted. As a result, the Spark Grant will help Cal State Long Beach Pregnant and Parenting Students Initiative by creating a landscape analysis that will help us understand what the current efforts are of the CSU campuses. This analysis will also create a baseline for improvement of services across the CSU system and beyond. In addition, the analysis will help us create and increase a system-wide support by sharing best practices, lessons learned, and other findings to help us support and create an inclusive programming and services to help support our pregnant and parenting students. And we're very excited to have the support. And thank you, Michelson, for uplifting our communities through education.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Debbie Raucher, Project Director at the John Burton Advocates for Youth. Debbie, please tell us what JBay will be doing this year through your Michelson Spark Grant.
Thank you so much for having me. So, John Burton Advocates for Youth. We work to improve the quality of life for California's most vulnerable youth and young adults. So, focusing on young folks who have experienced foster care or, excuse me, homelessness. So this year, we know that one of the things that's really needed in order for students to be successful and have access to basic needs resources is for campuses to have basic needs centers. And the funding at the state level to allow campuses to create these kinds of basic needs centers has been sporadic. Some years there's funding, some years there's not. And so we're really going to be working to educate policymakers to understand why having permanent funding for student basic needs centers, in particular at the community colleges, is so important. I'm excited to say that we're collaborating with a range of stakeholders around this, most notably the Student Association. So in particular, the Student Senate for California Community Colleges and the Cal State Student Association. So we'll be marrying our voices to those of student leaders, doing training with student leaders as well to get these messages out to members of the legislature and other policymakers so that there can be permanent funding. And I'm going to just post in the chat, anybody who's interested in staying up to date on the policy efforts around this, there's a Google form that you can sign up at.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to all our partners for your participation today. These partners join our grantees Swipe Out Hunger and Believe in Students in tackling student basic needs. Swipe Out Hunger is leveraging its network of both students and administrators to help create effective systems for dispersing and publicizing federal emergency aid to students across its member campuses. The organization is developing digital training tools and strategies to ensure responsive, transparent, and equitable distribution of funds. Believe in Students and its partner, the Hope Center for College Community and Justice, is providing technical assistance to institutions, state, and federal governments to advance a comprehensive set of policies for low-income students, success that includes students' access to public benefits like SNAP, and increased access to emergency aid. Believe in Students and the Hope Center are also identifying state policies in California that can make post-secondary education more affordable and remove barriers to access for students. In addition to all of our grantees, 20mm's impact investment portfolio includes an innovative approach to emergency student aid management and distribution, equity. The first evidence-based and research-informed emergency aid application uses an algorithm to eliminate implicit bias, help students apply for emergency aid in minutes, approve applications within hours, and deliver aid to students within 24 hours. The app also features a Yelp-like component that identifies off-campus and on-campus resources available to students, providing a one-stop digital shop for emergency support resources. A recent partnership with the Foundation for California Community Colleges vetted equity, making it available for community colleges to implement on their campuses. In addition to our work in the emergency student aid space, Michelson 20mm will be educating policymakers on the need to identify permanent funding streams for student basic needs work in California. And we'll be engaging student basic needs experts in an advisory council tasked with surfacing the most pertinent policy issues in the state. And with that, we'd like to thank our amazing panelists, our new partners, and everyone in the audience for joining us today. We are honored that you spent this time with us and hope to connect with you and hear about what fantastic work you are doing to help students meet their basic needs. Please stay engaged and sign up for our newsletter and sign up for Spark Grant updates. We plan on launching another Student Basic Needs Spark Grant round in the last quarter of 2021, so stay tuned for that. Feel free to reach out to me directly at miguel@20mm.org or visit our website at 20mm.org. A recording of this webinar will be uploaded to our Michelson 20mm YouTube channel by tomorrow. Thanks again and have a great rest of the day. Take care and thank you for all you do. Have a good one.